Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a world of the supernatural? Have you ever wondered what the world would be like if ghosts and demons really existed? Well, who's to say that they don't? What if there were people dealing with these kind of threats right now and you never even knew it? This is what the SCP Foundation does. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the SCP universe, you must understand what it is exactly. SCP is a collaborative writing effort built upon thousands of writers and over a decade of world building. The universe is hosted on the SCP Wiki, which was founded in 2008 and is still going strong. SCP stands for Special Containment Procedures, or Secure, Contain, Protect. This acronym is used in-universe to speak about two things. 1. The name of the Foundation, in the writing, is focused on, and 2. The classification of entities within the universe. To help you better understand what the Foundation is all about, here is the official in-universe mission statement provided by the YouTube channel SCP Archives. Go give them a watch, please. It's worth it.
Clandestine and worldwide, the SCP Foundation operates beyond jurisdiction, empowered and entrusted by every major world government with the task of containing items which jeopardize normalcy. The Foundation specializes in containment and attempts to understand artifacts that pose a significant threat to global security. The Foundation operates on three basic principles: secure, contain, and protect. We secure the objects in question to protect the well-being of humanity. We contain these objects and keep them hidden from the public so they cannot be used for malicious purposes. Finally, we protect these objects from damage and study them for the advancement of science and technology.
The way that SCP works as a writing platform is anyone with an account that is verified by the moderators can submit their own works to the site for review by the moderators and the community. If the story or idea gets accepted by the moderators, it will be officially put up on the site. However, it is not easy, since these articles need to be approved, and with over a decade of submissions, it gives incentive to try really hard to do the best they can with their writing. Every submission must follow a specific formula and layout to be accepted by the community. This layout goes as follows. SCP number. SCPs are found on the wiki and organized by number. The SCPs are put into a series. Every 1,000 SCPs are a series. In each series, there are a limited number of spots, and every writer must choose a number that is available to be selected, as there are a limited number of spots for each series. Every submission must follow a specific formula and layout to be accepted by the community. This layout goes as follows. SCP number. SCPs are found on the wiki and organized by number. The SCPs are put into a series. Each 1,000 SCPs are a series. In each series, there are a limited number of spots, and every writer must choose a number that is available to be selected, as there are a limited number of spots for each series. The next part of the layout is name and object class. The name of the SCP is obvious, what you will name the SCP. There's really no set naming scheme for the SCPs, but the community likes it when the writers are clever with them. Object class. SCPs, as previously stated, are objects and entities that are contained, and object class states how hard it is to contain that specific item or entity. This rule is non-negotiable. The object class is an important indicator on what you are about to read and how the tone is going to be. The object classes are as follows. Safe, the item can be left alone in a storage locker or under a guard, and there will be no risk of breach. Keep in mind, this does not mean that the item itself is actually safe to handle. Safe SCPs are usually the class writers use when they want to do wholesome types of writing. A good example of a safe class SCP is SCP-999, the Tickle Monster. Euclid. This SCP is more difficult to contain and needs more security and protocols to keep it in. A good example of a Euclid class SCP is SCP-049, the Plague Doctor. Then, Keter. This means that the object or entity in question is very difficult to contain, if not impossible. They require extensive procedures and expenditure of resources to keep contained. A good example of a Keter class SCP is SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy reptile. The next three parts of the layout are 1. Containment procedures. The list of procedures and resources needed to contain the SCP. This varies heavily between SCPs. Next, description. This describes what an SCP actually is and what it does. Then finally, addendum. The addendum are supplementary materials that further expand the SCP's story. Addendum can include exploration logs, incident reports, or even scientific reports about the specific SCP. Now that we know all that, here is a great example of an SCP. In fact, this is the first ever written SCP. This SCP came from a 4chan post in 2007. SCP-173. Object Class: Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. Item SCP-173 is to be kept in a locked container at all times. When personnel must enter SCP-173's container, no fewer than 3 may enter at any time, and the door is to be relocked behind them. At all times, 2 persons must maintain direct eye contact with SCP-173 until all personnel have vacated and relocked the container. Description: Moved to Site-19, 1993. Origin is as of yet unknown. It is constructed from concrete and rebar with traces of Krylon brand spray paint. SCP-173 is animate and extremely hostile. The object cannot move while under direct line of sight. Line of sight must not be broken at any time with SCP-173. Personnel assigned to enter a container are instructed to alert one another before blinking. Object is reported to attack by snapping the neck at the base of the skull or by strangulation. In the event of an attack, personnel are to observe Class 4 hazardous object containment procedures. Personnel report sounds of scraping stone originating from within the container when no one is present inside. This is considered normal, and any change from this behavior should be reported to the acting HMCL supervisor on duty. The reddish-brown substance on the floor is a combination of feces and blood. Origin of these materials is unknown. The enclosure is to be cleaned on a bi-weekly basis. SCP is under Creative Commons, and so gaining profit off of it is damn near impossible. So the entire intellectual property is controlled by the community. You can only make profit off of Creative Commons by tracking down and getting permission from every author that has worked on the ideas you are going to present, which is impossible. However, despite this, many fan films, fan works, and even video games have made their way to the internet. Many of them are very high quality and are an absolute labor of love. The SCP community is one of the most involved communities on the internet, and that's because the community is what creates the content. If they want good content, they have to make it themselves. It is also one of the biggest sci-fi universes ever created, rivaling even Star Wars in scope. It is also, to my knowledge, the only intellectual property controlled entirely by the public and not some corporation or an individual. SCP is a rabbit hole that keeps going and going and going. If you get into it, prepare to waste many hours just deep diving into the wiki and fan content. It is a truly unique platform for writing, and the fact that you can write whatever genre you want as long as it fits into the universe can still be accepted makes it a proving ground for new writers and can be a great tool to experiment. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. This is something that I really love and is close to my heart. I hope you'll gain the same appreciation that I have and seek out more.